Your knowledge of contract language is imperative.
You must know what a violation looks like if you wish to be active in its cessation.
It is important to understand that being active and knowledgeable affects your overall bargaining strength.
Together, towards a more militant NALC. Good morning, letter carriers, and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, the podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to the city letter carrier, with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball. Before we get into the good stuff, I'd like to start by making yet another announcement of a Q&A. Last episode, I announced that I was having a Q&A with Mike Cariff for his run for national president. Today, I would like to announce that I will also be having James Henry on in September to do the same. So this is going to be two potential presidential candidates, the only two that I know are certainly running that are not the establishment ticket. Publicly, I'll probably not take a side on this because I like to stay unbiased. But if there's any other candidates that would like to reach out to me, please feel free to reach out because I think it is important to have a healthy election in any kind of election situation. And I think the most healthiest thing is to know everything about every candidate running so the membership can make their best choice. Just like with Mike Cariff, you'll have until September 1st to submit questions, and I'll be asking James Henry the questions you submit. Submit them to the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook Messenger or to the email rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. All questions submitted will be anonymous, but I will ask all the questions. The candidates will not have a debate, and they will not share an episode, but they will have their own separate and distinct episodes so as to give them the same airtime and respect. Now today, it will be a shorter one, but I think it's an important discussion either way. So today I'd like to talk to you about a seldom grieved work hour limitation that I think is important that we get back on track with. With the sudden focus on pivoting, there is a work hour limitation that may be being violated in addition or simultaneous to improper mandation. That's right, carriers. If you're being pivoted and you go over 8 hours, that is improper mandation, and you should get your steward to file right away. Now, stewards, what they've been trying to use at my office is a bullshit excuse for improper mandation during a pivot. Before I get into the work hour limitation I'd like to talk about, just let me tell you this. They're trying to tell me that because these carriers are in less than 8 hour status, that they have to give them an 8 hour day. And that they're going to use the rule of reason because all these carriers who are in a less than 8 hour status, they're going over maybe like 2.25 clicks, 0.15 clicks, and that they needed to provide them an 8 hour day, which might make sense to some people, but no, that's a bullshit excuse because the rule of reason only applies to a carrier's bid assignment because that rule of reason was only established during the letter carrier paragraph, which also only applies to overtime on a carrier's bid assignment. So, stewards, don't fall for that stupid argument. I wouldn't blame you if you did because to some people that might make sense, but it's not true. So make sure you're filing for improper mandation every time a carrier goes over on their pivot. And carriers, you must do what you're expected to do and ask management for instructions when you realize that you will be going beyond 8 hours, and also keep record of asking them for instructions. Don't make any choices yourself. Don't go over on your own. But even if you did, I'd argue that that's management's mismanagement. And even though they have the right to do so, they also have the right to pay the consequences for mismanagement. But all that is beside the point. Maybe I'll give that its own episode. But today, we won't really be talking about improper mandation. You know what? I might make that next week's episode. But today we will stick to one of my favorites. And that is the work hour limitations of Article 8.5F. Article 8.5F, limitations. they will look familiar, as they are the same thresholds that are enforced to give you the penalty rate. That is an additional 100% premium beyond your straight time rate. So it's double time, as many people would affectionately call it. Article 8.5F sets 3 distinct work hour limitations that apply strictly to non-ODLs, 2 distinct limitations that apply to OWA, and they do not apply to the ODL and all carriers during the month of December. Well, specifically the exclusionary period of December. Article 8.5F reads as follows. Excluding December, no full-time regular employee will be required to work overtime on more than 4 of the employee's 5 scheduled days in a service week, or work over 10 hours on a regularly scheduled day, or over 8 hours on a non-scheduled day, or over 6 days in a service week. Article 8.5F applies to both full-time regular and full-time flexible employees. The only 2 exceptions to the work hour limits provided for in this section are for all full-time employees during the penalty overtime exclusion period, December, and for full-time employees on the ODL during any month of the year, Article 8.5G. Both work and paid leave hours are considered work for the purposes of the administration of Article 8.5F and 8.5G. Yet, listen to that one. That last sentence says that if you're on a leave status, paid leave, that is, not LWAP, such as, annual or sick leave, that counts towards your Article 8.5F limitations. Also your 8.5G, but that's beside the point during this episode. One thing I would like to note, if your office is anything like mine and has no knowledge of contract language and sticks to incorrect talking points, technically in this situation, I'm going to bring up, it's not that much of a misguidance because it's still within their rights, but one thing I would like to note is management often says, I need to provide the ODL carriers with 1 8-hour day per week. They will often say it's contractual. It's just their way of blaming their own decisions on the union or the contract and trying to take blame off of themselves because they're being stingy. While it is true, in most situations that lack improper mandation, they do have the right to avoid penalty and give an 8-hour day to the ODL. This isn't contractually provided to the ODL. As you heard earlier, the work hour limitations do not apply to the ODL all year round. This is not something the contract expects to happen, only management's desperate attempts to save on penalty and blame the union for it. There's also one thing I'd like to cover that is relevant to Article 8.5F and should be read together in terms of enforcing Article 8.5F, and that is the Work Assignment Memorandum. Notice the fact that Article 8.5F goes over exemptions, but nowhere do you see the OWA list. You might assume that they are bundled in with what they call the ODL, or OTDL. This is not true. This is mentioned in the Work Assignment Memorandum. I would like to read from the JCAM, which reads in relevant part. The Work Assignment list is distinct from the regular ODL, discussed in Article 8.5.C.2. It was established by a letter of intent dated May 28, 1985. This is the same letter of intent I was talking about in episode 11, which is the overtime changes episode, that denied the work assignment list carriers from being able to sign the NS Day list. That very sentence that denies their ability to work on the NS Day also plays a factor in whether or not the OWA is considered exempt from Article 8.5 limitations. It reads in relevant part, for purposes of overtime on a non-scheduled day or other than their own assignment, carriers on the work assignment list are treated exactly the same as any other full-time carriers not on the ODL. They may be required to work overtime under the provisions of Article 8.5d. This provides that if an OWA carrier on a non-scheduled day is to be treated exactly the same as any other full-time carrier not on the ODL, then the limitation of no more than 8 hours per day on a non-scheduled day applies to the on-work assignment list. Another limitation from Article 8.5f also applies to the on-work assignment list. But this other limitation is situational. The guiding language from the JCAM that talks about this reads as follows. Full-time letter carriers who sign the work assignment list are considered to be available for up to 12 hours per day on regularly scheduled days. However, the work assignment agreement recognizes that it is normally in the party's best interest not to require employees to work beyond 10 hours per day, and managers should not require work assignment volunteers to work beyond 10 hours, unless there is no equally prompt and efficient way to have the work performed. End quote. Efficient in this regard is talking about how much it costs, which means pay rate. So essentially, here we have a provision that says as long as there is carriers who can be prompt and within the same or lower pay rate, then it is in our best interest not to work an on-assignment list carrier beyond 10 hours in a given day. So kind of like rule of reason, as long as there were an ODL or a CCA or a PTF in the same pay status or lower that could have taken that overtime off the OWA when they're going beyond 10 hours in a single day, then it is a violation of Article 8.5f, or at the very least, a violation of this OWA memorandum. It is very unpopular opinion, as people who sign the OWA typically want up to 12 hours on their own assignment. Unfortunately, it's undeniable this is how the contract reads. Most places will pay an OWA up to 12 hours if they send an ODL over to help at 10 hours, but technically, I do believe it's not the correct way of doing it if it falls within the same pay status or lower. But nonetheless, what your membership defines as correct does provide a large point of consideration. So I don't knock those branches who are doing it that way. This is one of those things you must play by ear, just like LMOUs. Certain practices are better for certain areas. So to summarize, Article 8.5f is a work hour limitation set forth to protect workers who do not wish to work too much overtime. It applies to non-ODL carriers in full. It applies to the OWA carriers in part. And it does not apply to any carrier during the month of December, that is the December exclusionary period, not the entire month, and to the OTDL during the whole year. If you're familiar with the thresholds of when you receive penalty, you should be familiar with Article 8.5f limitations. They are as follows. No carrier shall work beyond 8 hours on their NS day, beyond 10 hours on a regularly scheduled day, and should have more than 4 out of 5 of their scheduled shifts go into an overtime status. This work hour limitation should be imposed by stewards. I do know this is a complicated subject, and sometimes especially complicated for those who are not used to filing Article 8 type grievances. But, it's an easy one as long as you have a little bit of practice. If you are being consistent as a contract enforcer, you must pull through for those carriers who do not wish to work too much overtime. It's a very serious issue that a lot of people are suffering from. So, it's about time we pull all the things that we can out of our playbooks to be able to keep those carriers in as little overtime as possible, because management likes to force here at the post office, and it's about time we stop doing that. Like I said earlier, this is one of those violations that often will occur simultaneously with the pivoting shit that's been rampant. Because when carriers are given pivots on their NS day, they might go over 8 hours, and that's a violation. You must think of this as a protection from too much overtime, so it essentially establishes a pecking order of overtime distribution that places the OTDL in penalty first prior to the OWA, if they can be made available to take off of the OWA. This can be done differently in your area. Do it however your membership prefers. As I have said before, it's more common for regions to prefer that the OWA is entitled to their own overtime up to 12 hours no matter the circumstances. But that's because in those areas, the OWA wants their own overtime up to 12 hours. They don't want to give it away. Just remember, this work hour limitation does not apply to CCAs and PTFs. Unfortunately, the only work hour limitation for CCAs and PTFs that exists outside of the new CCA MOU is ELM 432.32. ELM 432.32 is an important provision that must be filed on whenever it's violated, using Article 19 for its incorporation into the National Agreement. If you aren't already familiar with what it is a provision that limits employees from working beyond 11.5 hours on any given day. This one is more commonly filed because it is the only thing that protects PTFs and CCAs. A lot of people are pretty familiar with it, so I don't think it needs its own spotlight. But for those who actually don't know about it and want to learn more, please feel free to message me on the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook. As for an appropriate remedy to this Article 8.5F issue, just as you guys should already know, the most appropriate remedy for something you haven't been enforcing yet is a stop order. Most commonly, a cease and desist or other appropriate alternatives that are just as strong as a cease and desist. If they continue to violate, I would escalate to a percentage. Start with 50% and go from there. It can be argued that if you already have an escalated monetary remedy for ELM 432.32 or Article 8.5G, which obviously had an exclusive remedy of 50%, then you can try to argue that it is also a work hour limitation and that it deserves the same monetary reward. This argument doesn't usually go very far because usually Step B or an arbitrator will not buy it. Although it does make sense, they usually like to only establish awards for each separate and distinct violation, however similar it is in nature. Either way, as I said before, if you want to be a militant steward and you haven't filed these before, please step up to the plate and start filing these. All you need is the hours analysis report for any given pay period. There, you could see the employee's day off in the left column. It will show up as a line instead of a letter for the day, like a Saturday would be an S. Well, if it was their NS day, it would have a line instead. There's one line for Sunday, which is all of our NS days, and then an additional one for whatever NS day they had that week. You can use this to identify if they had more than 8 hours on their day off. Otherwise, it's self-explanatory. Look for carriers over 10 on a given day and identify whether or not they are on the OTDL or OWA. If you find an OWA, identify if there were ways this could have been carried out by a CCA or OTDL on straight time or overtime. And look for carriers that have 5 out of 5 of their scheduled days beyond 8 hours. Again, for those that have 5 out of 5 of their scheduled days beyond 8 hours, if they are OTDL or OWA, they will be fine. But if they're a regular non-ODL carrier, they're being violated. If anyone would like a template for this, I'll be creating one over this next week. When it is done, I'll be posting it to the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook. Sorry I couldn't have this one already created. I didn't have the time to make it yet. I've been working on a lot of Step B appeals, but unfortunately, that's just what you got to do when you juggle both educating carriers and doing your job as a advocate. But that's the life I like to live. It takes a lot of time out of my personal time, but that's what I'm here for. But like I told you, this one's going to be a short one, and it's pretty much done. I hope you learned something valuable today. And as always, have a good day.
Brothers and sisters, this guy is good, man. He's fucking good.
And my boy Joshua, he killed it. Man, he's lockstep right now. He's killing it.
You would think this guy has been around for 30 fucking is. That's how good he is. Yeah, it's like he wrote the contract.